Human janitor adopted disabled alien child. 10 years later, discovered she was the Empress's daughter. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The fluorescent lights of Nexus Station flickered overhead as Ryan Mitchell pushed his mop across the glossy floor of the arrivals terminal, just another invisible worker in the vast interstellar hub where a dozen species crossed paths daily. The station's public announcement system crackled to life, its monotone voice cutting through the ambient noise. Attention, all personnel. Quarantine protocols initiated in Docking Bay 7. Medical team requested immediately. Ryan paused, leaning against his mop. Quarantine protocols were rare and usually meant trouble. Still, it wasn't his business. He continued his work, navigating around hurried travelers who barely acknowledged his existence. 3 hours later, as Ryan was finishing his shift in the less-traveled maintenance corridors of Sector C, he heard a sound that stopped him mid-stride. A soft, rhythmic clicking, almost like hiccups. Following the noise, he found himself at the entrance to a rarely used storage compartment. The clicking grew louder as he approached. Ryan hesitated, then pushed the door open. In the corner, partially hidden behind storage containers, was a small figure wrapped in what looked like emergency thermal blankets. As the light from the corridor spilled in, the figure recoiled, emitting a series of rapid clicks that Ryan now recognized as distress signals. "Hey there," Ryan said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "Are you lost?" The blanket shifted, revealing a small, pale blue face with large, milky white eyes that seemed to stare past him rather than at him. The creature was unmistakably Cerealian, a species from the distant Andromeda colony. What struck Ryan immediately was that the child, he was almost certain it was a child, had deformities unusual for Cerealians. Her limbs were twisted at odd angles, and one side of her face drooped slightly. "Security will be looking for you," Ryan said gently. "Did you get separated from your parents?" The young Cerealian emitted another series of clicks, but this time Ryan noticed they formed a pattern that sounded vaguely like galactic standard speech. She was trying to communicate. "You hide me," she managed, her voice a mixture of clicks and halting galactic standard. "Please." Ryan's mind raced. This had to be connected to the quarantine alert. A stowaway, perhaps, but she was just a child, and clearly in need of medical attention. "What's your name?" he asked. "Leary," she replied, her milky eyes blinking rapidly. "They want send back." "Die there." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. The Cerealian Empire was known for its genetic purity standards. Children born with deformities or disabilities were often returned to the cosmic current, a euphemism for euthanasia. Just then, Ryan's comm device buzzed. A station-wide alert scrolled across the screen. "Notice, report any sightings of unauthorized Cerealian nationals immediately. Fugitive from diplomatic vessel. Approach with caution." Ryan looked at the frightened child, then at his comm device. He had 20 minutes until the end of his shift, when he would need to pass through security to return to the residential sectors. "Okay, Leary," he said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me and stay very quiet." Smuggling Leary through station security was easier than Ryan had anticipated. The janitor's cart had a hidden compartment for hazardous cleaning materials, just large enough for a small Cerealian child. The night security officer barely glanced at Ryan as he scanned his ID and waved him through. Once inside his modest apartment in the station's lower residential ring, Ryan helped Leary out of the cart. Under better lighting, he could see that her condition was worse than he'd initially thought. Her legs were malformed, making walking difficult, and her respiratory system seemed to struggle with the station's atmosphere. "Are you hungry?" Ryan asked, searching his sparse kitchen for something that might be compatible with Cerealian biology. Leary nodded, her large eyes taking in every detail of the small apartment. "Food." "Yes," she managed. Over the next few days, Ryan learned that Leary had been aboard a diplomatic vessel when she'd managed to escape during docking procedures. She'd been smuggled out of Chirelia by a sympathetic medical officer who couldn't bear to see her, returned to the current due to her genetic variations. They say wrong made, Leary explained in her improving but still halting galactic standard. Not perfect, not worthy. Ryan, who had spent his life being overlooked and deemed unworthy of attention by the very people whose messes he cleaned, felt a connection to this child that transcended species. There's no such thing as wrong made, he told her firmly. Just different made. The decision to keep Leary was never explicitly made. It simply became reality. Ryan used his savings to consult a discreet doctor in the lower levels who specialized in non-human biology. Dr. Naomi Foster was initially hesitant, but softened when she saw Leary's condition. Her issues are significant but not untreatable, Dr. Foster explained after a thorough examination. The main problems are skeletal malformations and some neurological differences that affect her sensory processing. With therapy and possibly some corrective surgeries, she could live a fairly normal life. Will she ever walk normally? Ryan asked. Dr. Foster shrugged. Hard to say without more specialized equipment. But with proper braces and physical therapy, she'll definitely be mobile. The bigger issue is keeping her hidden. If station authorities discover an undocumented Cerealian. Ryan nodded grimly. I know. I could lose my job. Or worse. And she'd be returned to Cerealian custody, Dr. Foster added softly. Given their policies regarding genetic impurities, the unspoken conclusion hung in the air. Over the following months, Ryan established a routine. He worked his regular shifts, brought home station scraps that could be repurposed for Leary's physical therapy equipment, and spent his evenings teaching her galactic standard and basic education modules he downloaded from public terminals. Leary proved to be remarkably intelligent. Once she mastered galactic standard, her vocabulary expanded exponentially. By her estimation, she was approximately 7 Earth years old, though Cerealian development differed somewhat from humans. Why do you help me? She asked Ryan one night as he adjusted the braces Dr. Foster had designed for her legs. Ryan thought about it. Because everyone deserves a chance, he said finally. My parents died when I was young. No one gave me much of a chance either. I ended up a station janitor because it was the only job I could get without formal education. Leary reached out one of her 3-fingered hands and touched his cheek. You are good, she said simply. Ryan smiled. And you're smart, brave, and definitely worthy. 6 months after Leary came into his life, Ryan faced a new challenge. Station management announced mandatory residential inspections, a routine security measure, but one that would certainly reveal Leary's presence. We need to make it official somehow, Ryan told Dr. Foster during their regular checkup. I can't keep hiding her forever. Dr. Foster considered this. There might be a way. I have contacts in the refugee resettlement program. If we could create documentation suggesting she was part of a previous refugee group. Would that work? Cerealians aren't known for seeking asylum. No, but there was a small group from a Cerealian colony world that sought protection 2 years ago after a political uprising. We could create records suggesting she was separated during processing. It was risky, but they had few options. Using Dr. Foster's connections and a considerable portion of Ryan's savings, they created an identity for Leary as a refugee from Chirelia's outer colony of Talus. The documentation would never withstand serious scrutiny from Cerealian officials, but it was enough to satisfy station bureaucracy. When the inspection came, the security officer barely glanced at Leary's documentation before making a notation and moving on. Ryan nearly collapsed with relief once the door closed behind the inspector. We home now? Leary asked, emerging from her room with the help of her newly improved leg braces. Yes, Ryan said, feeling the weight of illegality lifting slightly from his shoulders. This is home. As the months turned into years, Leary's condition gradually improved. The braces allowed her to walk with only a slight limp, and regular treatments from Dr. Foster helped manage her respiratory issues. Her intelligence continued to astonish both Ryan and her tutor, an older station teacher who'd been persuaded to provide private lessons for a medically fragile refugee child. By the time Leary was 10, by Earth standards, She could easily pass for any other Cerulean child with minor disabilities. Her pale blue skin had deepened to a healthier azure, and her once milky eyes now showed defined pupils, though her vision would never be perfect. Ryan had been promoted from janitor to maintenance supervisor, allowing them to move to a slightly larger apartment in a better section of the residential ring. Life had settled into a comfortable routine, with Leary's existence now accepted, if not fully documented, by station authorities. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Attention all station personnel and residents. The public announcement system declared one morning. In 3 standard cycles, Nexus Station will be honored by a state visit from Her Imperial Majesty, Empress Teleria of the Cerulean Dominion, who will be conducting a diplomatic tour of allied space stations. Security protocols will be enhanced during this period. All residents are required to update their documentation and submit to additional identity verification procedures. Ryan felt his blood run cold. Enhanced security meant deeper background checks. Leary's falsified documentation might not withstand such scrutiny, especially with Cerulean officials on the station. "We have to leave," he told Leary that evening, "before the Empress arrives." Leary, now articulate and thoughtful, shook her head. "Running would only make us look suspicious. Besides, transport manifests will be checked even more carefully than residential records." "Then what do we do?" Leary tilted her head, a gesture she'd picked up from Ryan over the years. "We hide in plain sight. I've been studying Cerulean cultural protocols. During imperial visits, it's traditional for colonial subjects to present themselves and offer gifts. If we participate in these ceremonies as expected, we're less likely to draw attention." Ryan wasn't convinced. "That puts you right in front of Cerulean officials." "But with hundreds of others," Leary countered. "And my medical condition is now officially documented as a result of a childhood illness, not a genetic variation." After much debate, they decided to follow Leary's plan. Ryan used most of his savings to purchase appropriate formal clothing for both of them, and Leary practiced the elaborate ceremonial gestures required when in the presence of Cerulean royalty. The day of the Empress's arrival, Nexus Station was transformed. Decorations in the royal colors of deep blue and silver adorned the main concourse, and security personnel were positioned at every junction. Ryan and Leary joined the crowd of station residents gathering for the ceremonial welcome. Leary wore a traditional Cerulean robe that cleverly concealed her leg braces, and Ryan stood beside her in the formal attire prescribed for a human guardian of a Cerulean minor. They positioned themselves near the back of the gathering, hoping to fulfill their ceremonial obligations without drawing attention. A hush fell over the crowd as the Empress's procession entered the main concourse. Imperial guards in gleaming armor led the way, followed by various dignitaries and advisors. Finally, Empress Teleria herself appeared. She was tall even for a Cerulean, with skin the color of deep ocean waters and eyes that seemed to capture light and reflect it back with greater intensity. Her ceremonial robes flowed around her like liquid silver, and the imperial crown, a complex arrangement of crystals and rare metals, adorned her elegantly elongated head. As the Empress moved through the crowd, accepting gifts and acknowledgments, Ryan felt Leary tense beside him. "What's wrong?" he whispered. I know her," Leary whispered back, her voice trembling. "Not from memory, but something deeper. A recognition." Before Ryan could respond, the Empress suddenly stopped her procession. Her head turned slowly, scanning the crowd until her gaze fell directly on Leary. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the Empress and the small Cerulean child stared at each other across the crowded concourse. Then, breaking all protocol, the Empress stepped away from her guards and walked directly toward them. Ryan felt panic rising in his chest. He placed a protective hand on Leary's shoulder, ready to run if necessary, though he knew they wouldn't get far. The Empress stopped before them, her tall figure casting a shadow over both Ryan and Leary. The crowd around them had fallen completely silent, and Ryan could feel hundreds of eyes on them. "Child," the Empress said in the musical tones of High Cerulean, which Ryan only partially understood. What is your name? Leary performed the perfect ceremonial bow despite her braces. This one is called Leary, Your Imperial Majesty, she replied in flawless high Cerulean. The Empress's eyes widened slightly. She reached out with long, elegant fingers and gently tilted Leary's face upward. For several heartbeats, she studied the child's features with an intensity that made Ryan's protective instincts scream in alarm. How old are you, Leary? The Empress asked, switching to Galactic Standard. 10 standard cycles, Your Majesty, Leary replied. The Empress's gaze shifted to Ryan. And you are her guardian? Ryan swallowed hard and bowed as Leary had taught him. Yes, Your Majesty. Ryan Mitchell, Maintenance Supervisor. Leary came to us as a refugee from Talus Colony. Something flickered in the Empress's expression, recognition, perhaps, or suspicion. She turned to one of her advisors and spoke in rapid Cerulean that Ryan couldn't follow. The advisor looked alarmed, but nodded and immediately spoke into a communication device. You will both accompany me, the Empress said, returning her attention to Ryan and Leary. It wasn't a request. Imperial guards closed in around them, not roughly but with a firmness that permitted no resistance. As they were escorted away from the stunned crowd, Ryan caught Dr. Foster's worried gaze from across the concourse. He gave her a small nod, trying to communicate that they would be all right, though he had no such confidence himself. They were led to a private reception room that had been prepared for the Empress. Once inside, the guards positioned themselves at the doors, and the Empress dismissed her advisors with a gesture. Soon, only Ryan, Leary, and Empress Teleria remained in the opulent room. Now, the Empress said, her voice softer but no less commanding, I would like to hear the truth about how this child came into your care, Mr. Mitchell. Ryan looked at Leary, who nodded slightly. Taking a deep breath, he told their story, finding Leary hiding in the storage compartment, learning of her escape from certain death due to Cerulean genetic purity laws, and their years together as an improvised family. Throughout his account, the Empress's expression remained unreadable. When Ryan finished, she turned to Leary. May I see your legs, child? She asked gently. Leary hesitated, then carefully raised her robe to reveal the advanced braces that now allowed her to walk almost normally. The Empress knelt down, a shocking breach of protocol, and examined the braces with careful fingers. Ingenious, she murmured. And your vision? I notice your pupils have definition now. Dr. Foster developed special treatments, Leary explained. I can see shapes and some colors, though never perfectly. The Empress rose to her full height and walked to a window overlooking the station's central hub. For several minutes, she remained silent, her back to them. 10 years ago, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, I gave birth to a daughter with several genetic variations. According to our laws, upheld for 10,000 years, she was deemed unworthy of life. The Empress turned to face them, and Ryan was shocked to see moisture in her luminous eyes. I was told she had been returned to the cosmic current, as tradition demands. Ryan felt Leary's hand slip into his, squeezing tightly. But I never believed it, the Empress continued. A mother knows. I secretly ordered genetic material preserved from my child before the ceremony. For comparison, should I ever find reason to hope? She gestured, and a door opened. The advisor who had been dismissed earlier returned, carrying what appeared to be a medical scanner. Without explanation, he approached Leary and requested permission to take a genetic sample. Leary looked to Ryan, who nodded uncertainly. The process was quick and painless. A simple light passed over Leary's skin. The advisor studied the results, his expression changing from professional detachment to shock. He whispered something to the Empress that made her close her eyes briefly. Leave us, she commanded, and the advisor bowed deeply before exiting. The Empress approached Leary slowly, as if afraid the child might disappear. Your genetic signature, she said, her voice trembling slightly, matches that of the Imperial House. Specifically, it matches that of my daughter, Princess Liritala, who was reported dead 10 standard cycles ago. Ryan felt the floor seem to shift beneath him. Beside him, Leary stood perfectly still, her face a mask of confusion and dawning recognition. "I named you for the Lyratala flower," the Empress said softly. "It grows in the harshest regions of Chirelia, yet produces the most beautiful blooms." She knelt again before Lyri. "You are not a refugee from Talus colony. You are Princess Lyratala of the Imperial House of Chirelia, my daughter." The silence that followed was profound. Ryan felt Lyri's hand slip from his as she took a hesitant step toward the Empress. "I remember," Lyri whispered. Not clearly, but a song. A lullaby about stars becoming flowers. The Empress made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "I sang it to you every night before you were taken away." She extended her hands, but didn't touch Lyri. "The medical officer who was supposed to perform the ceremony must have smuggled you away instead. An act of treason for which I am eternally grateful." Ryan found his voice at last. "What happens now?" he asked, dreading the answer. The Empress rose, composing herself with visible effort. "Now, Mr. Mitchell, everything changes. The princess must return to her rightful place." Ryan felt his heart constrict. He'd known this day might come, the day he would lose Lyri. But he'd never imagined it would be to an imperial throne. "And what of her condition?" Ryan asked carefully. "The laws regarding genetic purity will be changed," the Empress interrupted, her voice suddenly hard with determination. "I am the Empress. The laws exist at my command." Her expression softened as she looked at Lyri. "And it seems the cosmic current has returned my daughter to me. Different made, but perfect in her own way." Lyri looked back at Ryan, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "But Ryan is my family too," she said firmly. "I won't leave him." The Empress studied Ryan with new interest. "The man who saved and raised my daughter when my own people would have let her die." She nodded slowly. "Perhaps there is wisdom in keeping such a person close to the throne." For the first time since they'd been escorted from the ceremony, Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. But it was quickly tempered by reality. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I'm just a station maintenance supervisor. I know nothing of imperial courts or politics." "Yet you knew enough to save a child deemed unworthy," the Empress replied. "That suggests a wisdom many of my advisors lack." She turned to Lyri. "Would you like your guardian to accompany us back to Chirelia, Princess?" Lyri nodded emphatically. "He must. And he needs a better title than guardian." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Imperial ethicist. Someone who helps the Empire remember what's right when traditions say otherwise." The Empress laughed, a sound of genuine delight. "Imperial ethicist. Yes, I believe we could create such a position." She extended her hand to Ryan. "Mr. Mitchell, would you accept this role in my daughter's court?" Ryan looked at Lyri, the child he'd found hiding in a storage compartment, who had become the center of his world, and saw both fear and excitement in her eyes. Their simple life was over, but perhaps something extraordinary was beginning. "I would be honored, Your Majesty," he said, taking the Empress's hand. 3 days later, as Ryan packed the few belongings from their apartment that seemed worth taking to an imperial palace, he found Lyri, now officially Princess Lyratala, sitting quietly in her room, holding the crude wooden figure he'd carved for her first Nexus Station Unity Day celebration years ago. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bed that would soon belong to someone else. Lyri shook her head. "Just remembering. This has been the only home I've known." "Home is where your family is," Ryan said, repeating what had become a mantra between them over the years. "And we'll still be together." Lyri leaned against him. "Mother says I'll need to learn so much. Imperial protocol, political theory, technological interfaces." "You're the smartest person I know, of any species," Ryan assured her. "You'll master it all. And you'll have to learn too," Lyri pointed out. "Imperial ethicist Mitchell." Ryan laughed. "I'm still not sure what that job actually entails." "It means you tell the Empire when it's being stupid," Lyri said with the directness she'd never lost despite her improving diplomatic skills. "Like when they think different made means wrong made." Ryan hugged her gently. "I can do that." A chime indicated someone at the door. Ryan opened it to find one of the Imperial guards, standing stiffly in the narrow corridor of the residential section. Her Imperial Majesty requests your presence, Princess, the guard said formally. Final preparations for departure are underway. Leary nodded and rose, using her braces with the practiced ease of long familiarity. We're ready, she said, taking Ryan's hand. As they walked toward the docking bay where the Imperial vessel waited, station residents stopped and stared. News of Leary's true identity had spread throughout Nexus Station, transforming her overnight from a quiet, disabled refugee child to the lost princess of the Cerulean Empire. Dr. Foster waited near the security checkpoint, her eyes red from crying. She embraced Leary fiercely. I've uploaded all your medical records to the Imperial physicians, she said, and I've included my research notes on your treatments. They should be able to continue without interruption. Thank you for everything, Leary said. Mother says you're to be offered a position in the Imperial Medical Academy, if you want it. Dr. Foster looked startled. Me? But I'm just a station doctor. Who helped save the princess? Ryan reminded her with a smile. That's worth something in Imperial circles, apparently. Beyond the checkpoint, Empress Teleria waited with her entourage. As Leary approached, the assembled Cerulean officials bowed deeply. To her, Ryan realized with a jolt. Not to her mother, but to the princess herself. Are you ready, daughter? The Empress asked as Leary reached her side. Leary looked back at the station that had been her sanctuary, then up at Ryan, who had been her protector, and finally at the Empress, who was her birth mother and her future. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in a gesture that suddenly reminded Ryan of the regal woman beside her. I'm ready, Princess Lyritala said, her voice clear and confident. Let's go change an empire. As they boarded the Imperial vessel, Ryan found himself remembering the frightened child hiding in a storage compartment, clicking in distress. How far they had come from that moment. How far they still had to go. The ship's engines hummed to life, and Nexus Station began to recede from view through the observation window. Leary stood between Ryan and the Empress, one hand in each of theirs, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. Home is where your family is, she whispered, squeezing Ryan's hand. He squeezed back, ready for whatever came next. Always. The journey to Cherelia took nearly 3 weeks, even aboard the Empress's personal starship with its advanced propulsion systems. During that time, Ryan watched as Leary, now officially Princess Lyritala, began the process of learning who she was meant to be while holding on to who she had become. Imperial tutors arrived at her quarters each morning, teaching her the complex history and protocols of the Cerulean royal court. In the afternoons, she met with the Empress herself, their conversations ranging from personal memories to the intricacies of imperial governance. Ryan was permitted to attend these sessions, partly as Leary's emotional support and partly to begin his own education as the newly created imperial ethicist. The position didn't exist until 3 days ago. One of the imperial advisors, Minister Kelvin, had informed Ryan with poorly disguised disdain. The Empress created it specifically for you, which means no one, including yourself, knows exactly what it entails. Ryan had simply nodded. Then I'll define it as I go. What soon became clear was that Leary's return would shake Cerulean society to its foundations. For 10 millennia, the Empire had practiced genetic selection, removing any children with significant variations from the population. This policy was so deeply ingrained that it was considered not just law but sacred tradition. The general population doesn't even question it, Leary explained to Ryan after one of her history lessons. They believe it strengthens our species, keeps us pure. And now their princess is exactly what they've been taught to reject, Ryan said quietly. Leary nodded, her expression troubled. Mother says there will be resistance, especially from the High Geneticist Council. They've guided these policies for thousands of years. On the 7th day of their journey, Ryan was summoned to a private meeting with the Empress. He found her in the ship's observatory, watching the blur of stars as they traveled through hyperspace. Your Majesty, Ryan said, bowing as he'd been taught. Mr. Mitchell, she acknowledged, gesturing for him to join her. Or should I say, Imperial Ethicist Mitchell? Just Ryan is fine when we're not in formal settings, he offered. The Empress studied him for a moment, then nodded. And I am Teleria, when protocol doesn't demand otherwise. She turned back to the stars. I wanted to speak with you about what awaits us on Chirelia. The truth is, I am placing both you and my daughter in considerable danger. Ryan had suspected as much. Because her existence challenges the genetic purity laws? Precisely. For millennia, these laws have been unquestioned. Families mourn, but they accept. I appeared to accept, too, when I was told my daughter had been returned to the cosmic current. Her voice hardened. But I never did. I simply lacked the power to change things then. And now I am Empress, with more authority than any ruler in 5 centuries. My military reforms have secured the loyalty of the Imperial fleet. My economic policies have brought prosperity to worlds that were once neglected. She turned to face Ryan fully. I have spent 10 years building the power I would need to protect my daughter if she were ever found. But it will still not be easy. Ryan considered this. You've been planning for this possibility all along. Teleria nodded. Hope is a powerful motivator. Even the faintest hope that my child might have survived. She composed herself. There will be those who call for adherence to tradition. The High Geneticists Council will claim that acknowledging Liratala undermines the foundations of our society. Will they directly threaten her? The Empress's expression darkened. They would not dare move openly against the Imperial House. But there are other ways to remove inconvenient royals, particularly those with health vulnerabilities. Ryan felt cold at the implication. Then we protect her. At all costs. Yes, the Empress agreed. Which is why I have another task for you, beyond your official duties. She moved to a console and activated a secure communication channel. I've arranged for you to meet someone. The screen flickered, and a cerulean face appeared. Older, with deep blue skin faded to a dusty azure with age. Your Majesty, the figure bowed. Professor Valen, the Empress acknowledged. This is Ryan Mitchell, the human I told you about. The one who raised Liratala. The professor's eyes widened slightly as he studied Ryan. Remarkable. And he knows nothing of our work. Not yet, the Empress confirmed. Mr. Mitchell, Professor Valen leads a clandestine research collective that has been working against the genetic purity doctrines for nearly 50 years. Their work has been conducted in secret, with my covert funding for the past decade. Ryan looked between them. What kind of research? The kind that proves our entire genetic philosophy is based on scientific fallacies, Professor Valen said bluntly. The variations we've been eliminating aren't weaknesses. They're evolutionary adaptations that could have made our species stronger, more diverse, more resilient. There are worlds where Cerelians with genetic variations were secretly sent instead of being returned to the current, the Empress added. Hidden colonies where they've thrived for generations. Professor Valen has been studying these populations. Ryan began to understand. You're building a case against the purity laws. We've been building it for decades, Professor Valen confirmed. But we needed 2 things, irrefutable scientific evidence, which we now have, and the political power to challenge the High Geneticists Council, which only the Empress possesses. And now a third component, the Empress said softly. A living princess who embodies everything our research suggests. That different doesn't mean lesser. Ryan realized the enormity of what was happening. This wasn't just about Leary's return. It was about dismantling a system of eugenics that had defined Cerelian civilization for thousands of years. What do you need from me? He asked. Your perspective, Professor Valen said immediately. You've raised the princess. You've seen her overcome challenges, develop her own unique strengths. Your observations will be invaluable to our research. And your protective instincts, the Empress added. The official security detail will guard against physical threats, but you know my daughter in ways they never could. You'll notice if something is wrong, if she's being manipulated or isolated. Ryan nodded slowly. I can do that. But there's something else I think I can offer, something that might be even more valuable. What's that? The Empress asked. A human perspective. Cerelian society may be entrenched in these beliefs, but to an outsider, they're clearly wrong. Sometimes it takes an outside view to illuminate what those within a system can't see. The Empress's expression softened. That, imperial ethicist, is precisely why I created your position. As they approached Chirelia, preparations intensified. Leary spent hours each day with specialists who helped her master the intricate ceremonial movements her public appearances would require. Her leg braces were redesigned by imperial engineers, now elegantly concealed within traditional royal garments, while providing even better support. They want to present me as close to their ideal as possible, Leary told Ryan as they reviewed the arrival ceremony plans. Not hiding my differences, but not emphasizing them either. Are you comfortable with that? Ryan asked, concerned. Leary considered the question carefully. For now, yes. I need to be accepted before I can change minds. But eventually, I want to be seen exactly as I am. She smiled, the expression reminiscent of the small child he'd found in a storage compartment years ago. Different maid, remember? The day they entered Cerealian space, the Empress summoned them both to the bridge. Through the massive viewport, Ryan got his first glimpse of Chirelia, a breathtaking world of deep blues and purples, with swirling cloud patterns unlike anything he'd seen on Earth or its colonies. Beautiful, he murmured. It is, Leary agreed, standing beside him. Her voice was steady, but Ryan could see the tension in her shoulders. The Empress joined them at the viewport. The Imperial Palace is on the northern continent, overlooking the Celestial Sea. It's been the seat of power for 15,000 years. She placed a gentle hand on Leary's shoulder. And it has been waiting for your return, daughter. Their ship was met by an escort of ceremonial vessels that guided them through the atmosphere and toward the capital city of Talaris. From the air, Ryan could see millions of Cerealians gathered in the city's massive central plaza and lining the boulevards leading to the palace. Word of your return has spread throughout the empire, the Empress explained. This will be the largest royal celebration in centuries. Do they know about my differences? Leary asked quietly. They know their princess has returned from the dead, the Empress replied carefully. The details will become apparent in time. As they prepared for landing, imperial attendants helped Leary into her ceremonial attire, flowing robes of the deepest blue, embroidered with silver threads that seemed to capture and amplify light. A simple circlet, smaller than the Empress's elaborate crown but unmistakably royal, was placed upon her head. Ryan was provided with formal clothing that marked him as a member of the imperial court, not Cerealian in design, but human attire reimagined with Cerealian aesthetics. His official medallion of office, bearing the newly created seal of the imperial ethicist, hung from a silver chain around his neck. Stay close to me, Leary whispered as they assembled for disembarkation. Despite her royal appearance, Ryan could hear the nervousness in her voice. Always, he promised. The moment the ship's ramp lowered onto Cerealian soil, a symphony of musical tones filled the air, the traditional welcoming sonata performed by the Imperial Orchestra. The Empress descended first, her progress marked by ceremonial announcements in the ancient Cerealian tongue. Then, after a momentary pause that seemed to stretch into infinity, the herald announced, Her Imperial Highness, Princess Liritala of the Sacred Bloodline, Daughter of Stars, returned from the cosmic current. Leary took a deep breath and stepped forward into the sunlight of her homeworld. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming, a wave of sound that began as a collective gasp and transformed into cheers. Ryan followed several paces behind, as protocol demanded, watching carefully for any sign that Leary needed support. As they progressed down the ceremonial boulevard toward the palace, Ryan noticed the reactions changing. The initial cheers gave way to murmurs as people noticed Leary's careful gait, the slight asymmetry of her features. He could see confusion and, in some faces, dismay. Near the palace gates stood a group of Cerealians in distinctive indigo robes. Unlike the cheering crowds, they remained silent, their expressions cold and assessing. Ryan didn't need to be told who they were. The High Geneticist Council, seeing their life's work challenged by the very existence of the princess walking before them. The welcome ceremony in the palace's grand hall was elaborate and exhausting. For hours, Imperial officials and representatives from every Cerulean colony world came forward to pay respects to their returned princess. Through it all, Lyri maintained perfect composure, though Ryan could see the fatigue in her eyes as the day wore on. Finally, after the formal ceremonies concluded, they were shown to their quarters in the royal wing of the palace. Lyri's chambers were extravagant, a suite of rooms decorated in the traditional royal colors, with views overlooking the celestial sea. Ryan's adjoining quarters were more modest, but still more luxurious than anything he'd experienced on Nexus Station. "How are you holding up?" he asked when they finally had a moment alone. Lyri sank onto a cushioned bench, carefully removing her ceremonial circlet. "It's overwhelming. All these people looking at me, expecting. I'm not sure what they expect." "They don't know what to expect," Ryan said gently. "That's why you're going to show them." Before Lyri could respond, a chime announced a visitor. The Empress entered, having changed from her formal regalia into simpler attire. "You did well today," she told Lyri, sitting beside her. "The people were moved by your presence. Some seemed disturbed by my appearance," Lyri observed quietly. The Empress didn't deny it. "Yes, this is only the beginning of our challenge. The High Council has already requested an emergency session to discuss your confirmation as Imperial heir. They want to reject me," Lyri stated flatly. "They want to uphold 10,000 years of tradition," the Empress corrected. "But tradition must sometimes yield to justice and to truth." She looked at Ryan. "Our human friend and I have been preparing for this battle longer than you know." Over the following days, Ryan worked closely with Professor Valen and his research team, providing detailed accounts of Lyri's development and abilities. Meanwhile, Lyri continued her intensive education in Imperial protocols and Cerulean governance, preparing for her formal presentation to the Imperial Senate. A week after their arrival, the High Geneticists Council made their first public move. "They've issued a formal statement questioning your legitimacy," Minister Kelvin informed them during a private meeting in the Empress's study. "They acknowledge the genetic match to the Imperial House, but suggest that your variations render you ineligible for succession under the ancient codes." "The ancient codes are interpretive, not absolute," the Empress countered. "They have been reinterpreted many times throughout our history when circumstances required. Nevertheless, they've called for a full genetic assessment before the Senate," Kelvin continued. "They want to document the princess's variations in official record and have the Senate vote on whether they constitute disqualification." Ryan saw the hurt flash across Lyri's face, quickly masked by diplomatic composure. "They want to put me on display," she said. "Exhibit my differences like specimens in a laboratory." "Yes," the Empress agreed, her voice hard. "But we can turn their tactics against them. Professor Valen's research is ready. If they want to discuss genetics publicly, we will oblige them, with 50 years of suppressed research that demolishes their philosophical foundation." The day of the Senate hearing arrived all too quickly. The Imperial Senate chamber was an architectural marvel, a vast circular space with tiered seating for representatives from every Cerulean world and colony. At its center stood the presentation dais, where speakers would address the assembly. Lyri, dressed in formal but practical attire that neither concealed nor emphasized her physical differences, stood tall beside her mother. Ryan remained nearby, his position as Imperial ethicist granting him access to this most restricted of venues. High Geneticist Sorvin, leader of the council, spoke first. His presentation was clinical and merciless, detailing each of Lyri's genetic variations and physical manifestations, projecting magnified images of her DNA sequences alongside standard Cerulean patterns. "For 10 millennia," he concluded, "we have preserved the purity of our species by returning such variations to the cosmic current. Our evolutionary supremacy, our freedom from disease and degeneration, our very identity as Ceruleans rests upon this foundation. To place one with such variations on the imperial throne would undermine everything we have built." A murmur ran through the Senate chamber. Ryan could see many representatives nodding in agreement. Then the Empress rose. "The High Council has spoken about tradition and purity," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. Now let us speak of truth. Professor Valen, you may proceed. Professor Valen took the dais, activating a different set of holographic displays. Honorable representatives, for 50 years I have led a research initiative studying Cerealian genetic diversity, including populations where those with variations were secretly relocated instead of being eliminated. This revelation caused immediate uproar. The Empress allowed it to continue for several moments before raising her hand for silence. These populations have not only survived, but thrived. Valen continued when order was restored. Many of the variations we have systematically eliminated actually provide evolutionary advantages in certain environments. Furthermore, our research conclusively demonstrates that genetic diversity strengthens a species' ability to adapt to changing conditions and resist planetary-scale threats, such as pandemics. He proceeded to present decades of carefully documented research, showing how Cerealian colonies with greater genetic diversity had better survived environmental disasters, disease outbreaks, and other challenges. In short, he concluded, our policy of genetic purification has not strengthened our species. It has rendered us dangerously homogeneous and vulnerable to extinction-level threats. The Senate chamber erupted again, with representatives shouting questions and objections. High geneticist Sorvin demanded to examine the research data, which Professor Valen readily provided, confident in its scientific validity. Throughout the commotion, Leary remained composed, though Ryan could see the emotional toll this public dissection of her existence was taking. Finally, after hours of scientific and philosophical debate, the Empress signaled that Leary herself would address the Senate. A hush fell over the chamber as the princess made her way to the dais. Her walk was measured and deliberate, her leg braces now visible beneath her shortened formal robe, a deliberate choice she had made that morning. Honorable representatives of the Cerealian people, she began, her voice clear and unwavering. You have heard much about me today, about my genetic structure, my physical differences, my supposed weaknesses. You have not, however, heard about my life. She proceeded to tell her story, her rescue from certain death, her years on Nexus Station, the challenges she had overcome and the skills she had developed. She spoke of Ryan's care and Dr. Foster's medical innovations. She described how her different neurological structure had allowed her to master 7 languages in the time it took most Cerealians to learn 3. I stand before you not as perfect, but as complete, she said. Different made, not wrong made. My variations are not flaws to be eliminated, but differences to be understood. In the decade I lived among humans and other species, I learned that diversity is not a weakness to be purged, but a strength to be embraced. She turned slightly, acknowledging Ryan with a small gesture. My human guardian taught me that home is where your family is. Cerealia is my birthright, but it can only be my home if all Cerealians, including those different made like me, are welcomed as family. The chamber was utterly silent when she finished. Then, from the upper tiers, a single representative stood. My youngest sister was returned to the cosmic current 30 cycles ago, he said, his voice breaking. She had variations similar to yours, princess. Not a day passes that I don't wonder who she might have become had she lived. Another representative rose. My life partner and I chose not to have children because genetic screening showed we had a high probability of producing offspring with variations. We have denied ourselves family to uphold traditions that you now suggest are not only cruel, but counterproductive to our species' survival. One by one, senators began to share personal stories of loss, grief, and silent questioning of a system they had never been permitted to challenge openly. High geneticist Sorvin watched in growing alarm as the tide of sentiment turned against him. This emotional manipulation cannot override 10,000 years of established practice, he finally shouted. The princess's very presence is a violation of our most sacred laws. Laws can be changed, the Empress replied calmly, especially when they are based on falsehoods and have caused immeasurable suffering. The debate continued for days, with scientific experts from both sides presenting evidence and arguments. The proceedings were broadcast throughout the empire, sparking widespread discussion and soul-searching among the Cerulean population. During a brief recess, Ryan found Leary in the palace gardens, sitting beside an ornamental pool. "You're changing minds," he told her, joining her on the bench. "More representatives shift to our side each day." Leary nodded, trailing her fingers in the water. But Sorvin and his allies grow more desperate. Mother's security chief intercepted communications suggesting they might take more direct action. Ryan's protective instincts flared. "What kind of action?" "Nothing they can trace back to themselves," Leary said grimly. "A tragic accident befalling the fragile princess. A medical emergency that proves her unsuitability for the throne." Ryan felt cold fury rising within him. "We need to be extremely careful. We need to win this debate decisively," Leary countered, "before they can act." On the final day of deliberations, with the Senate chamber packed and the entire empire watching via broadcast, Professor Vallon presented his most compelling evidence yet: comprehensive data from a secret Cerulean colony where those with genetic variations had been sent instead of eliminated for over 3 centuries. "This population has developed remarkable adaptations," he explained, displaying holographic representations of genetic sequences, including resistance to radiation levels that would kill standard Ceruleans and immune responses effective against pathogens that have decimated some of our outer colonies. High geneticist Sorvin, seeing his life's work dismantled before the empire, made a final desperate argument. Even if some variations might have value, the princess's specific conditions render her physically incapable of fulfilling imperial duties. She cannot perform the sacred movements of the coronation ceremony. She cannot endure the rigors of imperial governance. It was Ryan who stepped forward then, taking the dais for the first time since the proceedings began. "I am not Cerulean," he began, acknowledging the obvious. "I am human, a species you have often considered primitive in comparison to yourselves. Yet in my primitive culture, we learned centuries ago that physical difference does not determine capability or worth." He turned to address Sorvin directly. "You claim Princess Liratala cannot perform certain physical movements prescribed by tradition. I ask, is the movement itself sacred, or is it the meaning behind it? Is governance about physical prowess, or wisdom and judgment?" Ryan gestured toward Leary. "I have watched this child overcome challenges that would break most beings of any species. I have seen her develop strengths precisely because of her differences, not despite them. Where standard neurological patterns would process information one way, her unique structures found different, often more efficient paths." He paused, looking around the chamber. "The true measure of any civilization is not how it treats its strongest members, but how it treats its most vulnerable. By that measure, I submit that Cerulean society has failed spectacularly. But today, you have an opportunity to begin anew." As Ryan returned to his position, the Empress rose for her final address to the Senate. "Representatives of the Cerulean people," she began, "you have heard evidence, testimony, and passionate arguments from all sides. Now you must decide. Will we continue to eliminate those among us who are different made, discarding potential strengths and innovative perspectives? Or will we embrace a new understanding of what it means to be Cerulean, one that values diversity as essential to our continued evolution and survival?" She gestured to Leary. "My daughter stands before you, living proof that our traditional beliefs about genetic variations are flawed. She is intelligent, capable, and strong in ways our homogeneous society has never considered valuable. As your Empress, I ask you to vote not just on her right to the throne, but on the future of our entire species." The vote was conducted in the ancient manner, representatives placing luminescent crystals into either the affirmation or negation vessels. As the final tally was calculated, Ryan stood beside Leary, feeling her tension through their linked hands. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we face it together." The chief senator approached the central dais, holding the official count. By a vote of 732 to 481, with 93 abstentions, the Senate recognizes Princess Liratala as rightful heir to the imperial throne and affirms the Empress's authority to modernize genetic diversity policies throughout the empire. The chamber erupted in a mixture of cheers and protests. Lyri's grip on Ryan's hand tightened momentarily before she composed herself and stepped forward to acknowledge the Senate with the formal gestures she had practiced for weeks. In the days that followed, change came swiftly to Chirelia. The Empress issued an imperial decree establishing a new genetic diversity commission, tasked with reforming laws and practices. Professor Valen was appointed its head, with Ryan serving as special advisor to ensure ethical considerations remained paramount. The most significant change, however, came in the form of a massive public health initiative. Throughout the empire, medical facilities were instructed to cease genetic purification practices and instead focus on supportive therapies for all Cerulean children, regardless of variations. 6 months after their arrival on Chirelia, Ryan stood on the balcony of his palace quarters, watching the twin moons rise over the celestial sea. A soft chime announced a visitor, and he turned to find Lyri, no longer the small, frightened child from the storage compartment, but a confident young princess who was already changing her world. "The first reports from the outer colonies are coming in," she said, joining him at the railing. 17 children with genetic variations who would have been returned to the current have instead received medical support and family assistance. Ryan smiled. 17 families who won't know the grief your mother carried for 10 years. Lyri nodded. It's a beginning. The old beliefs run deep, especially in the more traditional colonies. But each child saved is a victory. And the High Geneticist Council? Disbanded, though not without resistance. Sorbin has gone into self-imposed exile, declaring that we're dooming the species to degradation and weakness. She shrugged. Time will prove him wrong. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the play of moonlight on water. I received a message from Dr. Foster today, Ryan said eventually. She's accepted the position at the Imperial Medical Academy. Says she's already assembled a team to continue developing treatments for Cerulean variations. Good, Lyri said firmly. We need more allies like her. She hesitated, then added, Mother is announcing a new diplomatic initiative tomorrow. We're establishing formal embassies on 12 human worlds, with a focus on medical and scientific cooperation. Ryan raised an eyebrow. That's a significant shift in Cerulean foreign policy. It is, Lyri agreed. And she wants you to head the diplomatic corps as ambassador plenipotentiary. Ryan blinked in surprise. Me? I'm not a diplomat. I'm barely an ethicist, if we're being honest. Lyri laughed, the sound reminding him of the child she had been. You're the human who saved and raised an imperial princess when her own people would have let her die. You're the one who showed an entire civilization a different way of seeing. If that doesn't qualify you as a diplomat, I don't know what would. Ryan considered this. And you? How do you feel about me taking on this new role? I think it's perfect, Lyri said. You'll still be based here, still be my imperial ethicist when needed. But you'll also be building bridges between our peoples, helping humans understand Ceruleans and vice versa. She smiled. After all, who better to explain us to each other than someone who belongs to both worlds? Ryan realized she was right. His journey from station janitor to imperial advisor to potential ambassador reflected the larger transformation happening throughout Cerulean society. Old barriers falling, new possibilities emerging. Besides, Lyri added with a grin, someone needs to make sure humans understand why we think their music sounds like construction noise and why we find their obsession with cheese bewildering. Ryan laughed. Cultural exchange at its finest. 5 years later, on the anniversary of Princess Lyritala's return to Chirelia, the Empire celebrated not just their princess, but a transformation that had rippled throughout their civilization. The reforms had not been without challenges. Conservative colonies had resisted, traditionalists had predicted doom, and adjusting medical and social systems to support rather than eliminate genetic diversity had required massive resource reallocation. But the results were undeniable. Already, Cerulean scientists were documenting increased resilience to environmental challenges in populations with greater genetic diversity. Medical innovations pioneered to help those with variations were benefiting all Ceruleans. And most profoundly, families who would once have faced the heartbreak of losing children to the cosmic current were instead watching those children grow and thrive. In the Grand Hall of the Imperial Palace, representatives from across the Empire and beyond gathered for the anniversary celebration. Lyri, now 15 standard years old, stood tall beside the Empress, her ceremonial robes designed to accommodate rather than hide her leg braces, which she now wore as badges of pride rather than markers of difference. Ryan, dressed in the formal attire of both imperial ethicist and ambassador plenipotentiary to human worlds, watched with undisguised pride as Lyri addressed the assembly. 5 years ago, I returned to a world that would once have rejected my very existence, she began, her voice strong and clear. Today, I stand before you as proof that different does not mean lesser, that challenge can breed strength, and that what appears to be weakness in one context can be extraordinary power in another. She gestured to where a group of Cerulean children with various genetic variations sat with their families in a place of honor. These children represent our future, not just their individual futures, which would have been denied them under our old laws, but the future of our species. In their diversity lies our strength, our resilience, our ability to adapt to whatever challenges the universe presents. Ryan felt a presence beside him and turned to find the Empress. She has your directness, Teleria observed quietly, watching her daughter. Cerulean royalty typically speak in layers of elegant circumlocution. Lyritala states truth plainly, as you taught her. She would have found her voice regardless, Ryan replied. I just gave her a safe place to develop it. The Empress looked at him thoughtfully. You never expected any of this, did you? When you found a frightened child hiding in a storage compartment, Ryan shook his head. I just saw someone who needed help. And in helping her, you helped transform an empire. The Empress smiled. Perhaps there's a lesson in that for all of us. As the celebration continued around them, Ryan reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them here. From a station janitor and a disabled refugee to an imperial ambassador and a princess who was changing her world. It hadn't been easy. There had been resistance, threats, setbacks. But throughout it all, they had remained what they had become in those early days on Nexus Station, family. Lyri concluded her address and made her way through the crowd to where Ryan and her mother stood. Ambassador Mitchell, she greeted him formally, then broke into a smile and embraced him. Or just Ryan, when protocol doesn't demand otherwise. You were magnificent, he told her honestly. I had a good teacher, she replied. Several, actually. She looked between Ryan and the Empress. I was just thinking about something you used to tell me, back on the station. What's that? Ryan asked. Home is where your family is, Lyri said, taking both their hands in hers. I'm grateful every day that my family, and my home, includes both of you. As they stood together, representatives of 3 different journeys now intertwined, Ryan thought about that frightened child hiding in a storage compartment 10 years ago. How far they had come. How many lives had been changed because he'd decided to help rather than report, to protect rather than surrender, to love rather than fear difference. One simple act of compassion had transformed not just his life and Lyri's, but an entire civilization. It was a reminder that change rarely began with grand gestures or imperial decrees, but with individual choices to see the value in what others dismissed, to protect what others would discard, to love what others feared. Home is where your family is, he agreed, squeezing Lyri's hand. Always. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.